Hello, everyone. This is Kerwin of Father Son Galaxy. My guest is Pete Fletzer, a writer and host of Around the Galaxy. Now he is the author of this book, Who Owns the Myth? Star Wars Fandom and the Soul of the Saga. I can't wait to talk about this book. It's a part memoir, part cultural study, and it's about how a modern myth has captured the imagination of fans all over the galaxy. So let's bring him in. Pete Fletzer, welcome to Father Son Galaxy.
Hello there. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you for welcoming me. I'm not welcoming you. I guess maybe I am. How are you?
Uh,
Good to see you
Oh, great.
again.
Yes, it's been a while. We haven't spoken in a little bit. Yeah,
It's
but
been
I've
a
been,
bit of time. Yeah.
but I've been keeping in touch with the show. I have been watching the episodes, and
Nice.
I really enjoy it. You know, it really feels like a variety show to me, and that's a good thing. You
Yeah.
know,
I
yeah,
I like
good,
I like that. I like where I like hearing that because it's yeah, we just like you just want to have fun with this silly galaxy that we've been in love with for in your case and mine our whole life. So if we can keep it fun, then we're doing our job, and same with you. So I'm happy to hear that.
yeah. Thank you. Congratulations on the book.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It's been a real joy to put together, and kind of a learning experience for myself at the same time as putting together a book. So it's been a blast. I appreciate it. Glad you
Nice.
enjoyed it.
Thank you. How long have you had the idea of writing the book?
Well, it's interesting. I've always kind of felt like I had a book in me, but I didn't know what it was going to be. And a couple years ago, I thought, well, maybe the podcast, since I'd been doing it since 2019, maybe there was a story there. And so, actually, before I even started this book, I had started writing a book, kind of taking a lot of the different stories that I had heard from people who I'd interviewed. But I soon realized like that wasn't my story to tell. That was their story. It was great to get the stories from various places around the fandom, but it really wasn't mine to be told. And the other thing that I kind of realized after putting together the first handful of stories in that book was it's a very similar story. It's a very similar Star Wars background. A lot of people shared it with family. Like the story was, my father took me, my grandmother took me, I went with my older brother or sister or whatever. So while I realized that's a good thing, it just didn't feel like it was, like I said, my story to tell, or that very different a story unless you really go down into the deeper levels. So I thought, there's got to be something that I've learned from doing the podcast for this all these years, and I've always been a fan and very interested in the Joseph Campbell insight to the myth. And as I even mentioned in the book, when I first learned about it and made and sort of mapped the hero's journey against the first Star Wars movie and then the full Star Wars saga, it just really it made a lot of sense to me, and that there was that connection. But I think what I've learned over the last 6 or 7 years as I've been here, sorry to say 6, 7. I know if my son heard me outside, he'd be doing the thing. But over the last 6 or 7 years, I've certainly had, as you know, in some cases great, in some cases really challenging experiences online with fans. And I wanted to kind of dig into why people care so much. Why are we so passionate? And again, giving no quarter to the people who have used it to become ugly and just some of the worst sides of fandom. But I do know that there's a lot of passion in some of the most fierce arguments, and I really wanted to kind of dig into why that was, and try to see what I could learn about people and why they why people who may have loved the original trilogy still can't get over the prequels, or the sequels might not fit to them, or people who've come in through the sequels and what it all means. And I think I found that it's just, I think the reason there is any disagreement in any Star Wars fandom is for the valid arguments, it's because we just love it and it's part of who we are. And to have anything about it be a little bit different than what you had in your head or what you expected is sometimes difficult to handle.
Yeah. So let's go back to 1977. That was the year that you saw Star Wars, right? The
Yes.
first year of release. And how old
Yep.
were you?
I was 7. I was 7 years
7.
old. Yep. So I was kind of
Now,
prime target.
yeah. So now at 7, how did you hear about Star Wars? Why did you want to see it?
Well, I mean, at 7 years old, first of all, I remember my grandmother had given me a Star Wars T-shirt. My birthday's in July, so I hadn't seen the movie. But at that point, though, a lot of my friends had started seeing it, and it was everything that was being talked about. It was on the news. It was every TV show. It was every magazine that I saw come home, and so it was a thing, right? And back then, there was no internet, so of course, for something to dig that deep into the culture. Really had to have something special about it, and unfortunately, my dad, who was he was a weekend musician, so he wasn't able to bring me to go see Star Wars until September. So it was Labor Day weekend. We finally had the opportunity to go, and I by the time September came around, I went from just sort of hearing about it to my friends telling me you have to see it, and I was so excited to finally get there. And honestly, by the time I kind of walked into the theater, and again, I don't recall too much about the movie itself the first time I saw it, but I can still see the theater vividly. But it was like going to see a celebrity. It was like going to see some sort of legend come to life, because again, I didn't know much about the story yet. In fact, at that point, I still thought C-3PO was a bad guy. I don't know why, but I, it was just this thing that was everywhere. It was ubiquitous in the culture. And I remember just walking out and being forever changed. I remember sitting in the back of my dad's station wagon and pretending that every car that drove by was a TIE fighter, and I was trying to shoot it like I was in the Falcon. And then from that point forward, now that I had it to share with my friends who had seen it, it became our common language. All my friends, we played we played with all the action figures once they came out the following year. We would drawing pictures on our notebooks and talking about, well, why did Luke do this, and what do you think the Clone Wars are, and all these things. And it just became everything to us as kids. At that point, it was indelibly marked on my soul. There was just no way it was ever going to leave me at that point.
So just after the first watch, you walked out of that theater, and this movie was just not just a movie for you. It
Mm.
became like a phenomenon, and it just took over your life. It just happened that quickly.
Yeah, it really did. And I think part
Wow.
of it was because there was so much, that surrounded it. And um I remember I got the soundtrack double album, and that was sort of my way to revisit Star Wars, because of course, it wasn't on television yet or anything like that. And every single, my dad was really, he was one of those dads that once he knew I was into something, he he would, if there was even something slight and small that he could bring home to me to surprise me or something, Starlog magazine or anything that I could find that had a picture or mentioned it, or he would wake me up because there was going to be a special report on it on the 11 o'clock news, and we would watch the 2-minute report about it or whatever. And yeah, so it just really became such a part of my life. And again, I think, and one of the things that I sort of collected as I was thinking about the memoir part of this book is that it really became, as I said, a common language among us as friends, my friend groups, and we all we just dug into it so much that, and it's funny because we didn't really, there was no sort of multiplex. It wasn't easy to take your kids to the movies at those times. I mean, it wasn't difficult, but it wasn't, as easy as today to find a movie theater close by. So I honestly don't know how many times I saw it until it came to my local theater. So I probably, honestly, in the theaters, the first run, which was actually 44 weeks, I probably saw it maybe 5 or 6 times. Um, but that was spread out over a long period of time. But it was the conversation that surrounded it that sort of dug into us. And the thing that I think also, when the toys came out, that changed everything, because we were writing our own stories, right? We all, before he was Pondo Baba, he was just Walrus Man, and what was his backstory, and what were the things that we made up and envisioned in our heads. And I also still have very fond memories of me and my father trying to figure out, what do you think the Clone Wars were? And we didn't know. And George did such a great job of presenting us with this canvas of not just telling this really great story that was easy to follow because it hit all the mythical elements, all the things that we as people are used to seeing or have grown up with or have been with us since the dawn of time, but he created it on a palette that just gave us so much more to think about and to speculate on and continue the conversation.
Yeah. Star Wars didn't hit me that hard.
Hmm.
It took a little bit of time. I didn't see Star Wars in '77. I didn't see it
Hmm.
until '81. I saw it a
Okay.
year after I watched The Empire Strikes Back.
Ah, okay.
And my memory of the Empire was is vague. I just
Hmm.
remember the big reveal with Vader and Luke and
Yeah.
not believing what I was seeing. I thought Vader was just making it up. He was trying to get inside Luke's head.
Yep.
Um, but I wanted to know more about this story,
Hmm.
and I would just find whatever I could find, whatever books. I had a couple of comic books at the time. Marvel had a
Yeah.
line.
Yep.
Read the books. Never had any of the toys. I read the books,
Hmm.
but I think one of the things, well, two things that actually brought me closer to Star Wars was the Starlog magazine.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. So we had that, and that's just for people who don't know, just an entertainment magazine that talks about usually fantasy and science fiction films, and it
Hmm.
gets you prepared and gets you excited about the movie. And then the NPR series,
Ah, yeah.
yeah, the
The
Star
radio
Wars,
play. Yeah.
the radio program.
Hmm.
It was long, but
Hmm.
I was deep into it. And then by
Yeah.
the time Return to Jedi rolled around, I was more excited than I have ever been. And I
Yeah.
think once I saw The Empire, I think I felt the same way you felt when you saw the first movie.
Yeah.
When I saw Return of the Jedi, I became an instant fan, and then I've never looked back. Yeah.
Yeah. And I love that. And I think that's what's so brilliant about Star Wars, the original trilogy, the prequels, the sequels, and everything in between is it's that it's that galaxy which allows you multiple entry points. And so whether you came in through Empire, you came in through Jedi, you came in through the Phantom Menace, you came in through Book of Boba Fett, whatever it might be, um, it welcomes you in all those areas. And everybody, if it hits them at the right point in their life, it it grabs them. And that's really interesting. And I love I love that you started with Empire. Like, had you seen Star Wars before Empire?
No,
No.
I saw The
Okay.
Empire. Yeah. So what's interesting is, they're two different movies, and I didn't
Yeah.
know that until afterwards. But
Uh-huh.
The Empire Strikes Back is not the type of movie where you go in and you're cheering because the heroes are winning. It
Right.
wasn't that kind of movie.
Yep.
So it was kind of a downbeat for me.
Yeah.
But when I saw Star Wars, okay, and I say, all right, well, I could see how people got so excited about this movie because that was the movie where people could jump up and cheer, and
Yeah.
the destruction of the Death Star at the very end, and Luke being the one to take the final shot, and
Hmm.
Han coming at the last minute to save the day.
Yep.
I can understand if I was in the theater in '77, I would
Yeah.
have been standing up and clapping and cheering as well. But yeah,
Yeah.
that's not how it started for me.
That's interesting. I
Yeah.
love that. And then Return of the Jedi with its
Oh,
victory and
yeah.
sort of very
Everything.
defined ending, right? It allowed you
Yes.
to kind of
Yeah.
live with it for a long time and go with it. That's great.
It's
Yep.
to this day is still my favorite movie going experience. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
After 40 years, 40 plus years. Yeah, I had a
Yeah.
wonderful time. Yeah. Yeah. So tell me about the mythology of Star Wars. How would you describe it? What is it?
I think it follows one of the things that's interesting about what Joseph Campbell wrote in The Hero with a Thousand Faces and the creation of this hero's journey is there are traditional elements of every major myth that you can go back in time to, even as recent as Wizard of Oz, to you know the Iliad and the Odyssey, to the Ramayana from India, to all kinds of these stories. So it's interesting because once you start to realize that even stories from cultures that never interacted with each other have these same elements of the hero and the call to adventure and the refusal of the call, and then the labyrinth and the final battle and the return of the hero, all these things are very similar. And so what Lucas did was he intentionally sort of placed his crazy space fantasy on top of that and made it work. But I think the myth to Star Wars and this, because the other thing with myth is myth tells a story based on a truth that is so true that it can only be told in a story, right? And um, I think that what Lucas really did was he, in a time of the late 70s, when it was a very pessimistic world, the movies at the time were things like All the President's Men and The Exorcist and The Godfather, really great films, but not super optimistic. Even science fiction at the time was a little bit on the pessimistic side. Um, but he told a classic story of good and evil, and I think that's what Star Wars is about. I think by the time we got to Empire and Jedi, it became a story that expanded beyond pure, no gray area, good versus evil, and became a myth that told about the importance of family and found family. And again, if you think about a myth as being something that's so true that it's told in a story, you see the way Empire kind of launched this. Wait a minute, is the bad guy the father of our hero? What does that do to things? But again, and then with the introduction of Leia as his sister, but the people who were just as important as family, the droids, Han, Chewbacca, Lando, everybody who came along for that ride became a family. And so what I think, if I was to, nobody's asked me that question. It's a great question. If I was to sort of define what the lesson we're trying to get out of the original trilogy, is that yes, you good triumphs over evil, but it will face very very unique challenges, and you can't do it alone. Whereas I think a lot of classic myths, a lot of the ancient myths, are about the hero kind of going out on his own and facing the monster, head to head, one on one. And I think Star Wars continues even to this day to tell the story of, you can't do it on your own. You can be the hero, but you need to take advantage of or leverage the found family that comes with that. And I think that's a great story, especially in today's times, right? And if you think about, the other great thing about myth is a good myth evolves with, or at least reflects, the current times. And I think if you look at things now, I don't think there's anything more true than, in order to survive this world, you have to do it sometimes more than just with family. It requires a support group. It requires people to sort of walk with you on your path. And if that's the lesson from Star Wars, then that's a lesson I'm so excited to see people be able to take from it.
Yeah. Yeah. There's something that when I read your book, there's something I didn't know
Oh,
about you is you created a fan website.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, back in the 90s. So
Yeah.
I was working at the time, in for a company, and they were like, "Hey, this internet thing is happening. Maybe you could look into it for us." I was like, "Okay." And then I started, as I was learning how to create websites. At the same time, I was also trying to expose some of my writing to different places and different people. And I had been writing for, my father had and his friends created a board game, science fiction and horror trivia game. So I was writing columns there, and I figured I'll just put them up there. But I had learned to code, and what is something that I cared about, and even in the dark times, as we called it then, right? I was still such a huge Star Wars fan that. I created what may or may not be, I don't know for sure, but I know it was definitely one of the first, if not the first, Star Wars fan websites. It was called Echo Base, and it was built
Yeah.
on the members.aol platform, which was sort of this way to upload. And it was ugly. It was an ugly site. In fact, it's the only way I can ever go back and look at it is I have a binder in the other room where I have all the pages from the website. I printed them out. But it was great because it gave me, it was really unknown. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was discovering that Star Wars community and realizing that it was bigger than me and my friend group. And as I grew up, not everybody was still as nerdy about it as I was, but when I put it out there and it was found by people, and they just were sharing their love of Star Wars with me, it was really wild to me. And it really, it reminded it sort of set my path forward as to on building Star Wars communities, whether it's through social media now or the podcast or the book. But it was this great opportunity, and it led to me um, meeting Steve Sansweet, who then gave me the opportunity to write for Star Wars Galaxy magazine, and get a tour of Skywalker Ranch with Steve, and open the door for a lot of the Star Wars connections that I had. And if I was I look back on a lot of things in my life, and I'm happy to say that I was right time, right place. Like, the internet was just happening, so that was the
Yeah.
right time, right place. um, Calling Lucasfilm to find out where Steve Sansweet was going to be doing his tour about, because at the time in the mid 90s he was touring Star Trek conventions, and he was talking about the special editions which were coming out. And since I was the only website that people could find, they were asking me where Steve was going to be next. And so I picked up the phone on a whim and called Lucasfilm, as you do. And the receptionist picked up the phone, because it was the 90s and it was still receptionists picking up the phone.
Yeah.
And I expected to have them say, yeah, we'll email you his list, or no, we're not going to do that. But they put me straight through to Steve. They said, please hold on. And the phone picked up, and it was Steve Sansweet speaking. And I was blown away, because again, I was a fan, and I had all his books. I'm sure you have a bunch of his books from when you were a kid. He's the big collector, and at the time he was writing a lot of these collectibles books. It was before Rancho Obi-Wan was really starting to, I mean, it was starting to come together. But yeah, and he just said, "Hey, listen, I happen to have more work than I can possibly keep up with. Would you be interested in an assignment? Send me your some samples, and we'll see what we can do." And next thing you know, a couple of weeks later, I'm signing NDAs with Topps, who was the publisher of the magazine, and Lucasfilm. And for the next year and a half, I was doing fan features, and I was doing stories about upcoming toy and collectible releases, and talking to Ben Burt twice in my time doing Star Wars Galaxy magazine. So it was really an amazing door opening. But again, to your question, it was one of the first, and it was right time, right place. And um, it's helped me in so many ways since then as well, beyond Star Wars.
Well, that's fascinating, Pete, because I don't know how you even thought that a fan website is something that we would need. I mean, it's like as if you were seeing the future. I mean, that's pretty much what we have now. We have hundreds
Yes,
of
it's so
of
many.
websites. Yes, exactly. So the community, the fan community at the time, what was the feedback you were getting from these fans who saw the original trilogy?
It was a lot, because at that time there was sort of this rumor that George Lucas was thinking about doing the prequels when I first started. Um, and so people, it was funny, because they really just wanted to keep up with any news and rumors. And also, because it was before the rumor culture really existed and the leak culture existed. It was a lot of people that just wanted to share their ideas and thoughts. And so I ran a contest to say, what do you think the new Star Wars is going to be about? Who would you have play a younger Obi-Wan Kenobi? Who would you have, and just sort of getting all these really great things. I think my favorite fan theory was that he was named Obi-Wan Kenobi because he was a clone. And so his name was Obi-Wan. And I was like, that's great. Yeah, let's see that happen on screen and things. And, but also, things like Shadows of the Empire were happening at that time too. And so that was where I sort of did my first interview with an author, and had Steve Perry, who wrote that book. And it was funny, because it was certainly not a podcast interview. I sent him a list of questions in an email. He replied. I turned it into an article, put it up. But to answer your question, the community was just really about just people wanting to talk about it. It wasn't about what they did or didn't like. They liked everything. Um, or it seemed they did. And if they didn't like everything, they didn't go into why they didn't like things. And it was really, in hindsight, this sort of first look at what the Star Wars community, when it's at its best, is all about. It's just people who were like sending me emails and just saying, thank you for putting this together. And, if I can do anything to help, let me know. And, and I did like a couple contests, and It was fun. It was funny. I look back. There was one thing I did, which was a trivia contest, which is so crazy because you could have just Googled all the answers and gotten them all right. But apparently nobody did that. They just answered the questions on the site, and they got, some of them wrong, some of them right. And but it was just because people wanted to be a part of a Star Wars community, which was, so I think what was happening at that time, um, is I think people like myself were starting to realize that it's more than just my friend group. Like Star Wars always felt very personal. It was always something that I was the Star Wars guy. Even in the mid 90s when I was working a day job and had Star Wars action figures on my desk, and people thought that was a little bizarre. But I was the Star Wars guy. But to me, it was always something that was mine and my friendship and was close and personal to me. But then I was finding, Kerwin Yard was also a Star Wars fan. Wait a second, and who's this? And finding that this group of people who held Star Wars close to their hearts were everywhere, and that was really amazing to me. And I just loved sort of being able to open those doors for people.
Hmm. That's amazing. I mean, that's just groundbreaking. So what I want to do is I want to take a look at a section of your book. So you don't call the chapters in your book chapters. They're actually episodes, just like the films are episodes, right? So I want to read episode 2. And what you do is you also have a crawl, just like in the movies.
Yep.
Right? So I want to read the crawl for episode 2. You call it The Battle for the Myth. The galaxy is no longer at peace. As the saga expands, so do divisions among its followers. Creative shifts, corporate influence, and cultural tensions ignite fierce debates. What began as a shared love becomes contested territory, with rival factions fighting for control over the story's meaning. In this turbulent time, the light and dark sides of fandom clash across 1,000 battlefields. I thought that was pretty good. It's interesting. As I'm reading the book, and I was just thinking about, okay, well, when exactly did this rift in the fandom start? And I actually thought it started during the prequel era, but it actually went back a few years before that. It was the special edition.
Yeah.
Can you talk about the special editions and why was the changes that George Lucas made for the original trilogy so controversial?
Yeah. So one of the key questions for me as I built the story here, and it's, again, it started out as a handful of ideas and essays and that kind of thing. But once I started to think about the story, there was a question that struck me that I found very interesting. And it was, what happens when the creator of the myth, George Lucas, walks away for a number of years and then comes back and rejoins a conversation that he hasn't been a part of in a while? And as anybody who was, sort of in that sort of special edition time and really focused on what was happening, it was exciting, as Steve Sansweet was showing us, that there was going to be the special editions and we were going to see cleaned up scenes, and Mos Eisley was going to be, much more bustling, and we were going to see, we might see Jabba the Hutt in his new form or in his original thoughts and form. But what had happened over that time was the story of Star Wars, the original trilogy, became so ingrained in us. To make Han Solo not shoot first was almost a
Right.
personal affront to people who
Yeah.
were fans of the saga. And it's what's interesting about, and one of the great experiences I had writing this book was my dad was actually one of my beta readers, and while he didn't do a lot of editing, he wrote a lot of questions in the and comments in the sidebars and sent it back to me to make me think about things and expand ideas and things. And the point that he made, which is I think really true, is everybody kind of understood what Han Solo was before special editions, before Greedo shot first. Han Solo was a scoundrel who operated in defense and thought about himself first, right? Greedo sitting across from him, he's in a defenseless situation. So what do? You go on the offensive and you take out the person who is threatening you. And that says a lot about him as a character. And then because when he returns to save Luke or to cover Luke, that's him becoming, committing to the cause. That's him, no longer just out for himself. It shows a major character change. Um, and I think when Greedo shot first, to a lot of people, myself included, for quite some time, and if I'm being honest, probably still to this day, it was a change to the character that I wasn't ready to accept or willing to accept. It felt because what happens is you have that ownership. The question of the book: who owns the myth? It's a personal ownership, and somebody changed it. But the challenge was, it wasn't just 20th Century Fox deciding, well, it might be better if Greedo shoots first. It's the guy who gave us the story who said, no, this is the way I want the story to be. And so it was uncomfortable. But what was interesting from a pure pop culture and fandom perspective was everything Star Wars to that date was nothing but positive. There was some arguments over Ewoks at one point, but at the end of the day, everybody just was. Star Wars was this love fest, this community of people that just were happy with, just to be there. But for the first time, we had people, arguing over, well, does George have the right to change that? It's not what he did originally, and so what happened was there was this first kind of division in the fandom of, you're either a Han shot first guy, or I'm going to follow what George said happened in the story the second time he told it guy. And it was the first time there were sort of factions and tribes within the fandom. And of course, when the prequels came out, that continued, because again, it was what people had thought they knew about the story was a little bit different, and it wasn't exactly what they wanted. And I think that's a harder thing than people realize, especially when something, as we were talking about before, if it has become a part of who you are, if it doesn't go the way you want it to. I think that was the biggest problem with Last Jedi for people. For me, I thought it was a great story because I was an older man, an older person. I've gone through good and bad, and to see Luke go through that, to me, I could associate with that. But if Luke was, in my head, always just this white knight hero, um, that was difficult for me to accept. So I put Luke in The Last Jedi in the same category as Han shooting second, as uh, Anakin being a little boy, and seeing that unique story as well. So it was interesting. I'm not really answering your question directly, but other than to say, as a fan, to see the fandom divided for the first time, not realizing that this was going to go on for the next 25 years. It was an interesting thing to watch, and sides were taken for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to go back to the special edition, and I'm so glad you
Yeah.
brought up Han shot first. Now, there were many other changes that were made in the
Yep.
original trilogy. I mean, we could spend a half hour talking about all the changes. I mean, you got Jabba appearing in at the Hangar Bay in Star
Yep.
Wars. You got Jedi rocks in Return of the Jedi.
Yep.
But for some reason, this moment where Han no longer shoots first has
Right.
just drove the fans crazy. And I'm trying to
Yeah.
understand. Well, first of all, why did George want to go back and make these changes? And I thought
Mm.
that he was not happy with the way the films looked. And
Yep.
if he had the money at the time, that these are the things that he would have done. So now or the technology, not just the money, but the technology.
Right.
So now that he has the money and he has the technology, so he says, okay, well, I want to go back and do the things I wanted to do, but couldn't because
Yep.
I didn't have the money and the technology at the time. Bahan shooting second, Greedo shooting first has nothing to
Right.
do with the upgrading technology. It has nothing.
Yeah.
It didn't make the shot any. It didn't look any better. It didn't enhance the film. So what? What was George going for? Why did he want? What statement was he making? Having Greedo be the one to shoot first.
I don't know if he's ever really talked about it, and to me, it feels so. I think there's two possibilities. One is, I think he might have had in mind to make Han just a little bit more likable, right? And which wasn't the objective at the
Yeah,
time, right?
yeah,
Um, and I also think the other thing is, and now I understand what he meant by when he said, films are never finished; they escape. Right? It's kind of the same thing with the book here. Like literally up until the last edit, I literally added a chapter with about a week left before I was going to go to the first test printing. I was like, oh wait, I want to hit this. So I understand this. So my because also, let's face it, George probably didn't plan on Luke and Leia being brother and sister either. And so I think it was just, I think he had a change of heart as to what the character was supposed to be. And again, so if you break that down to this whole concept of what do the fans expect, I've told you the story this way. Han Solo is a scoundrel, and
Yeah,
he makes these choices, and he's me first, and then he changes, and that's a wonderful story arc. But what he's done now is he's softened him up. So him coming back to save Luke may not be that as big a deal as we might seem. So I don't know why he did it, and I think the other thing it could be, honestly, is this, I would feel better if Han did this and he just did it. And
yeah,
now he's kind of stuck owning it. Right now, he has to keep it and make his story as to why it happened. But it's funny. It feels like the fan base almost knew Star Wars better than he did in a way, right? And that's a very potentially argumentative statement, and I don't mean it the way it came out, but it's the fan base knew Han Solo this way, and if George had thought this all along, that's fine, but he didn't tell the story that way, and that's what I think threw people off.
yeah, yeah. So let's get into the prequel trilogy. Now, I know that first of all, I thought it was very impressive that you attended a red carpet premiere of the Phantom Menace in New
Yes.
York City,
Yep.
at Lowe's Astor Plaza, which, by the
Yep.
way, is actually the same theater that I went to see Return of the Jedi in.
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. I was living in Brooklyn at the time, so that was the
Oh,
theater I
wow.
went. Uh, I love that theater. I know that theater's not there anymore, but
Yeah.
so you went to the red carpet premiere. First of
Yep.
all, how'd you get a ticket to get into? And,
Well, yeah, good.
and second of all, what were
Yeah.
the people, the moviegoers' reaction when they saw the film, before they saw the film, and after they saw the film?
Yeah. So I mean, in fairness, it was I made up it was a charity event. So much like most of the other celebrities, not the other most like the celebrities that were there, they purchased the ticket. I purchased the ticket as well, but I used it as an opportunity to write. For at that point, it was for Star Wars Insider. So yeah, so I attended that premiere. Through charity, which again, that's one of the great things about Star Wars as a community, whether it's Lucasfilm, the 501st, or even smaller podcasts, just getting together for charity, like the things that you and I have done as a result of Podathon and that sort of thing. So it's always great to feel good about the charity work that we can all do together. So that's how I got in there. But what was interesting was, I think the best way to describe it would be like everybody who was there. And again, it's sort of similar to the podcast, right? One of my favorite interviews on my show ever was Charlie Benante, who's the drummer of the band Anthrax. I'm an old metalhead, and so when I found out that Charlie was a honorary member of the 501st, I reached out to his people, and they connected us, and we were talking, and I was like, oh my goodness. So, but after 5 minutes of getting over, this is one of my musical heroes from when I was a teenager, to just talking about Star Wars, we were just two Star Wars fans talking, and which has always been kind of what I've tried to do with the podcast. Um, but as it relates to going to the premiere, I mean, there was Glenn Close, Natalie Portman, Liam Neeson, the Backstreet Boys, Macaulay Culkin, Donald Trump, just like John Leguizamo and Christian, like they were all there, but they were all Star Wars fans. Like there was a buzz in that theater of, we're going to get to see Star Wars, and everybody was excited again. And so I found that very interesting. And of course, the logo comes up and everybody cheers, and but as I think is the case for a lot of people who were in that room at the time, I think there was this hope, this impossible magic we were trying to recapture of, back in 1977, when I was so engrossed in Star Wars and so taken by it. I was 7 years old. Now here I am, I'm 29 years old. And, the story didn't strike the way we expected. I think, I mean, I honestly, there was a piece of my brain that was like, I don't think this is really the final movie, because I felt like with, the Nemoidians with their very strange accent, the goofiness of Jar Jar, when you're 29, it doesn't hit. But I remember the very first podcast I did. I'm going off on a little tangent here, but the very first podcast I did, I interviewed my daughter just as a test, right? And at the time, it was 2019, so she was 10 years old, 9, 10 years old. And one of the questions I was asking all my guests at the time is, who's your favorite? Jar Jar Binks, Porgs, or Ewoks? Because those were three things that were kind of divisive in the three generations of fandom. And my daughter's response was, "That's not a fair question because I love them all." And I was like, she nailed it, and that's why Jar Jar worked. But as people walked out of the theater, they were there was like silence. There was a very sort of, in a way, I like, if I'm going by my own reaction was, I want to have loved that. So maybe I did. Maybe I have to see it again. Maybe I missed something. And it's the story I tell in the book about Christian Slater. As we're walking out, it's one of my Star Wars fandom highlights is walking out of the theater. So to set up the story a little bit, I didn't know what you wear to a premiere, to a movie. I didn't know. So I wore a suit, right? So I'm wearing a suit. Most people aren't wearing a suit. I am. And as I'm walking out the door, Christian Slater is right next to me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, he's one of my favorite actors at the time. And so I just turned to him and I go, Christian, what did you think? And he looks at me. And the suit's important because he had no idea if he should know me, if I was somebody he did know. I got that. You ever talk to somebody and they're like, you get the sense that they kind of think they know you, but they're not sure.
Yeah.
That's the way he was looking at me. And so he was very tepid in his response. And the best part was he gave me the classic Christian Slater look and he goes, visually stunning. And that was his response. And I think everybody felt the same way. Like, we want, and I remember talking to my friends after seeing it, who my friends were all jealous because I got to go see it, a week or two before they did. And I remember my response was, yeah, it was good. I can't wait to see it again. And I think everybody felt that way. It's what's bizarre is now Phantom Menace might be my go-to movie to watch. If I'm just going to throw on a Star Wars movie to have on, it's probably the Phantom Menace. And I don't know if that's because it's just such a fun adventure movie, and once you get over that the humor is made for a 12-year-old versus a 29-year-old, but it's got some of the best Star Wars in it. You have Darth Maul and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. You've got the pod race. You've got, as questionable as the accents are for the Nemoidians, it's still an interesting concept. And most importantly, it set up everything that we're at now. But in direct answer to your question, it was the feeling walking out and walking down to the after party was sort of it was more subdued than I think everybody thought they would be. And I think it's because everybody walked in with such high hopes and high expectations that honestly, there was no way it was ever going to match that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so everyone goes in with the frame of mind, oh, wow. They're thinking, if they're fans, that they've
Mm-hmm.
seen the original trilogy and
Yep.
they know how much they love the first three films, and
Yep.
they expect that this film is just going to be just as good.
Yep.
And it turns out for most people to be a disappointment.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, it's understood. But you have a good point in the story that you said about your daughter loving all of it
Yeah.
is, yeah, I've come to realize too that that movie is not for me or was not made for me. I mean,
Right.
I was in my, late 20s seeing this film, and yes, you're right. I'm not 10 years old. Maybe if I was
Mm-hmm.
10, I would have liked it more, but I'm not. And I'm
Right.
okay with it. But you do have a good point where there are some elements of that film that is just fantastic. You
Mm-hmm.
can't take anything away from the visual effects. They're the best.
Yep.
And you created one of the greatest villains next to Darth Vader,
Yep.
and that duel of the fates. I mean, that lightsaber battle is just unmatched to me.
Yeah.
So it has its elements, but as a whole, it's not one of the films that I would go back and have a return visit
Yeah.
to see the film. But and that's
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. No, and I
Yeah,
think that's the great thing about Star Wars in the community, and I think that's um, where the frustration comes for me is
yeah,
like, you don't have to love like, to me, The Last Jedi is the best Star Wars story
hmm
of all nine of the numbered movies. It's as a story, but it's also not a movie I put on all the time because it's a heavy movie. It's not Phantom Menace or A New Hope in that it's, just guns blazing, crazy wild action.
Yeah.
It's a good story, but it's a good adult story, and I can understand why it hit people in a different way. So, yeah, you're right. And there's 9 choices, and you
Yeah.
can like as many or dislike as many as you like. So,
Yeah. Exactly. What was your reaction when you heard that Lucasfilm was made a deal with Disney and Disney bought Lucasfilm for a little over $4 billion? What was your reaction when you heard that?
I was actually, super excited
Oh,
because, again, it's funny when one of the things that was great about writing this book was it reminded me of all the times that I had spoken about movies and Star Wars in particular with my dad. And one of the things my dad and I had been saying for years was, maybe because it took me literally until maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, honestly, to really embrace the prequels. It was probably, yeah, maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, to really embrace the prequels. So I was still of the mindset of, yeah, we need to recapture whatever that Star Wars is. So my dad and I used to talk all the time about, wouldn't it be great if George Lucas kind of gave the opportunity to different writers to write, a Star Wars movie. And that's what Disney kind of promised, was it was going to be new people looking at the story and going forward with it. So I was a little concerned about it being Disney, but at the same time I was excited because, they had a blank checkbook ready to go to create more of these stories. Um, and it was exciting to me because at the time I had a child who was 3 or 4 months 2 months old. He was just 2 months old, and a daughter who was 3 and change. And this meant that Star Wars was going to be back for me to share with my kids, not just the stuff that I had watched, but they were going to have their own Star Wars. And to me that was really super exciting. And it's proven to be the case. And when I look at, my daughter, she's too cool to like Star Wars now because she's 16, and I get it. But yeah, she'll come back to it because she was really into it there for a while. But my son, he came into it through the Clone Wars, and Clone Wars doesn't get finished without Disney, and he loves Grogu and the Mandalorian. And so the stories that have come out for him have given us the opportunity to be Star Wars fans together. So, but I mean, in transparency, I was nervous because it was Disney, and I felt good though because they had done such a good job with Marvel. But this is Star Wars; it's not Marvel, right? Whether,
yeah.
and you can make cases where they're the same and where they're not the same, but again, Star Wars is personal to people who love it, and so it was a little unnerving but exciting at the same time.
Yeah. So, so we talked about the divide that took place during
Yeah.
the special edition and the prequel trilogy. Now here comes the sequel trilogy,
Mm-hmm.
and the fandom has like split into two.
Yep.
Um, I don't know if there's any way that we can bring the fandom back. I don't know. What are your thoughts of that? Because right now it seems that there's money to be made to keep the fandom fighting each other.
Yeah.
Because you have those group of content creators who are actually just telling you everything that they hate about Star Wars,
Right.
and not telling the other side of the story. Like I can't see anybody just get up on a microphone and just say how much they hate Star Wars, but not
Right.
even talk about what they love about Star Wars. And I thought that's
Yeah.
very one-sided. And the only reason why they're doing that is because that's how they make their money. People want to hear the
Yeah.
negative side, the criticisms.
Yep.
So unfortunately, because money talks, I don't know if there's ever going to be a time. Well, maybe you can consider Andor or The Mandalorian. If there will be a time where the fandom will come back together. Do you see a time?
Yeah, and I don't. It's a really interesting thing to think about because, you know, I will never forget hearing or reading an interview with Rush Limbaugh, who I was not a fan of, but I remember him saying, "I hope Clinton gets reelected because people will listen to my show." Right? So,
Mm,
yeah, sure, he's out there saying, talking negatively about Bill Clinton, but
yeah.
That's what's bringing the money in. So it's an interesting question because I kind of go back and forth because I don't know if the fandom needs to be united again. And one of the things, in fact, it was one of the last chapters that I wrote and wanted to make sure I included was the people right now who are the most anti-sequel, anti-Disney era were kids when people were telling them that the prequels weren't real Star Wars, right? They were going through this same fight that now people who I would say probably millennial and younger who own the sequel trilogy in their mind. They love the Rey, Kylo, Poe stories, and there's not a reason not to. But that's their Star Wars, and the question is, will they eventually one day be sitting somewhere saying, episode 10, 11, and 12, that's not my Star Wars, or whatever. I don't think they will. I'm hopeful that they'll learn the lesson, but I think ultimately it will come down to when the people who are making this content um, have their own memories being made with Star Wars. And again, here's the thing: if I hated the sequels and I only watched, episode 4, 5, and 6 with my son, I'd have that memory, and that would be our Star Wars. And I don't have to love everything, but I think the fandom will come back more together when there's more of what the core of Star Wars is. And I think it needs to walk away from the Skywalker story. I hate to say that because, we all love Luke and Leia and that whole, that familial piece. But I think you only walk a line that can only be disappointing to people if you're trying to revisit that hero. Which is why it's always an interesting thing to watch the new James Bond come out. Whoever it is, there's always that kind of, well, that's not really the James Bond I remember. And that's okay because he's today's James Bond or whatever. So I don't know that the fandom will ever be back the way it was because it's a very different world. I think as long as creators don't get influenced by what they're hearing online and telling the stories that they like or that they are confident in, I have a lot of hope for the Sean Levy movie because he's operating in a completely different space. And I think that's why Mandalorian worked so well the first 2 seasons for people, because it brought us back to a familiar place but didn't rely on us to know or to see a change in what we knew. And so even if you didn't enjoy the sequels, you were in a spot where you knew the Empire had failed. There's still stormtroopers, there's factions out there, and every corner that Mandalorian turned showed us a new piece of the galaxy, and we were just happy to be there. So I think getting away from trying to continue the stories that we already know, but being willing to move forward. And I think that was hard for Disney because you bought this great IP and you figured everybody loves Luke, everybody loves, the Skywalker story, so let's tell more of that. What they didn't realize was by revisiting it, much like when George came back to revisit it, it was a conversation that had been going on for many, many years without you being a part of it. And now you're coming in and telling them what the story is. And that's difficult. So, I think it will benefit from not looking backwards and playing in this enormous galaxy, and telling interesting stories that make you realize you're in Star Wars. And what is it that makes it Star Wars? Well, it's got to be a lot of creatures. It's got to have the Force as this sort of underlying mystical sort of glue that holds it all together. There has to be exciting space battles. And I think the story needs to hit things that are universal, right? One of the things, and I'm sorry I'm bouncing all over the place, but one of the things that is so interesting about A New Hope is if you watch that movie with the sound off, you know who the bad guy is.
Yeah.
You know who the good guy is. You know who the hero is. You know who the mentor is. You know everything because it's just so core. And I want to see more of that, more telling these classic stories that it just so happens to take place in a galaxy that I want to see more of, but it's not essential to be related to Obi-Wan and Luke and Darth Vader.
Yeah. So we're coming up on the 50th anniversary of Star Wars. And Lucasfilm has already announced that the movie will be re-released to theaters on April 30th, 2027. but they
Hmm.
didn't tell us which version of Star Wars we're going to see. It has to be the original, right, from 1977, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think so.
yeah,
Yeah. And again, if you want to win the fans back, do that, right? Can you
yeah,
imagine the lines of people who are just happy because look, if you like the special editions more than the originals, you're still going to go back and watch the originals, especially if they're cleaned up. And if you've been, pounding the pulpit saying we need the unedited originals out there, then you're going to get it. And I think that's, and honestly, I think if you're celebrating the 50th anniversary of a pop culture touchstone, it's worth it for people to see it in the closest to the original form as possible.
yeah. I know for years fans have been wishing the reign of Kathleen Kennedy to come to an end, and I don't know. No one knows when that will happen, but
Yeah.
if it's approaching that, I think Kathleen Kennedy making the decision to release these films and release the original Star Wars film in the version that you know was seen in the theaters May 25th, 1977, she
Hmm.
would go out on top. And
Yeah.
I think that would just be great for her. Like there's so many things you could say about, the decisions she's made and what she has said. But for her to just come out and say, okay, well, here it is, what you've been waiting for 50
Yep.
years. This is the movie. I think that would just be fantastic for her. If she ever decides to leave, I think she would just go out on top.
I haven't thought of that, but that
Yeah,
that would be the best way to go, and position it as a big thank you to the fans, and yeah, I would love to see that, and I think you're right. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that's great.
yeah, yeah. So where do you see Star Wars and the fandom in the next 100 years?
I think I don't think that there will be as much new content, obviously in 100 years, but I do think that there will be. I think it will be taught alongside some of the great myths.
Yeah.
I think it's funny when you think about it. There were you could have been born at any time, but you happen to be born in the time of Star Wars, which is pretty amazing, pretty wild to think about. Um, but I think what's also interesting is I think new stories will be told in that galaxy because much like we see movies that come out every summer that take place during a time of the Greek gods or take place in
Hmm.
I mean look at Wicked and Wicked for Good, right? That takes place around the Wizard of Oz, which is what 90 years old, maybe 100 years old, almost 100 years old. What 95? I don't know. But it's a story that worked so well that when you tell stories surrounding it, um, it still works together and people want to see that. So I can see us still getting stories in that universe, but more than that, I think it'll be something that's taught as a classic mythological study.
Yeah, I agree with you. I could see this, along with Greek mythology, being taught
Yep.
in colleges and universities.
Yep.
Yeah, there'll be musicals and plays about it.
Yep.
There's so many characters they could just pick and choose which characters they want to tell a story about and turn it into a Tony Award winning play or
Yeah.
musical.
Yep.
Yeah, as absolutely can happen. And one of the things that you also mentioned was um, if fans were allowed to create their own stories, which
Yes.
I think is a great idea because, well, of course, Lucasfilm is still going to own the IP, but it
Hmm.
would be nice if they can allow fans to come up with their own stories because that's the only way these stories are going to get told, right?
Yeah.
Because is there's a lot of gatekeeping
Hmm.
in filmmaking, and if we didn't have it, Star Wars can control that. And I think what they can
Right.
do is they can, put something out there and say, hey, you have a great Star Wars story, send us a script or send us a story treatment. And, someone looks it over and says, okay, well, make it a contest,
Yeah. Yeah.
you whoever comes up with the great story or the great script, they choose it. They choose that script, and they go ahead and this person becomes famous, and they make a movie out of it, and it makes
Yeah,
a lot of money for them. So I think, yeah,
I
the
like that idea.
gatekeeping, yeah, if they can maybe reduce the gatekeeping that's taking place right now with filmmaking, that
Yeah,
this will be a great way to listen to the fans, because there are a lot of talented people out there with a lot
sure.
of great Star Wars stories. So, and they're not going to be told any other way, unless Lucasfilm controls, who gets to tell the story.
Well, and I think that that's the sort of the overarching sort of theme of the book here is that it becomes yours. It becomes, the story is now living in you, and you're telling the story, and you're thinking of the story in the way. Honestly, I think that's my biggest challenge with comic books, and Chris Ryans would want to, smack me for saying this, but it's filling in gaps that I don't necessarily need, and when they do fill it in, it doesn't go the way I would have done it. And that's,
Yeah.
that's not me being a gatekeeper. That's just me being not able to get into that story, right? And I think again, that's why the prequels hit people the way it did. That's why the sequels hit people the way it did. That's why the Acolyte hit people the way it did. Um, Again, not necessarily because of the execution, although we could have a conversation about Acolyte, but it's that it doesn't tell the story that is in your head, and that again is the most dangerous. But to your point, the people who do have stories in their heads, they're probably amazing, and I would love to hear them. And that's, again, that's the great thing about being a Star Wars fan. You see somebody randomly, you're at a party, and you meet another kid's dad, and he's wearing a Millennium Falcon t-shirt, and next thing you know, you guys are talking about Star Wars, and he doesn't have to love all the same things I do, but because we're in person and we're not online and we're not hiding behind a keyboard and an icon for our face, we can have a real conversation, and he can tell me why he doesn't like Rey as a character, or he, it is totally fine with Greedo shooting first, and let's talk about it, because that's what really keeps it alive, is the conversation and the passion around it, and then being able to agree to disagree. And as I think I said recently on another program, I said, on the internet, nobody agrees to disagree, and that's the problem. Like you and I probably, I remember when Acolyte came out, and we had dinner together. We were watching it in the theater, and you were honest about how you felt about it, and that was awesome. And because look, we're content creators, we know people, and we've met people who've created these things, and you don't have to love everything, and I don't love everything. If I was being honest, I often I am, as much as I can be. Um, I don't love everything, but
Yeah.
I love talking about it, and I want to hear why somebody loves the Acolyte and I did, and I want to hear why somebody doesn't love the Last Jedi and I do, and let's have that conversation, because that's what's keeping it alive. It's like talking about something you love with complete strangers, which is actually a really interesting community thing, an interesting thing about being a human being.
Yeah. Yeah. Star Wars will be here. It will outlive all of us.
one Hundred
Um,
percent.
it's um, this is wonderful. So thank you so much for writing this book.
Oh, thank you
I
for bringing
really,
it.
yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think if you're a Star Wars fan, or you want to know more about Star Wars, or hear from a person's perspective, and this is the book. This is a great holiday gift. I would pick this up. So this is Who Owns the Myth: Star Wars Fandom and the Soul of the Saga by Pete Fletzer. Pete, thank you once again for being on the podcast. Where can people find you?
You can follow me on all the social medias at the SSW Network. We have our YouTube channel where we do a live Thursday night show at on youtube.com/ at the SSW Network. And if you want information on the book, you can go to whoownsthemyth.com. There's links to the Amazon versions and the Kindle version, and there's also signed versions and swag packs and stuff like that. And you said holiday, so I'll throw it out there. If you use the code MythShip, you're going to get it shipped for free from me with the signed version. So,
Excellent.
but Kerwin, thank you so much,
Yeah.
man. This was so great to catch up with you, and I hope I see you before Philly Fan Fest, and I hope we get to talk again sooner than later.
Yes, thank you so much once again. This was really great. And if you are looking to find us, we're on the socials. We have a website, so you'll be able to find us anywhere you get your podcast. So just thank you once again, everyone, for watching us or listening to this episode Until next time, take care, and we will see you again.